Gaza is like Nariman Point to Kandivali.
Correct.
In Mumbai. It's half the size of Mumbai and it's densely packed.
Absolutely.
Millions of people.
So I'm not very sure whether this, and if the aim of the exercise was to get 200 odd hostages back into own country, men, women, children, then the plan would have been to put them away off the harm's way if the offensive comes in. Any prudent terrorist organization, Hamas, will know what is the response. The air will come, the ships will start firing, the ground forces, the missiles will fire. One day ground offensive will come.
Right.
So they would have moved the hostages. I mean, I would reckon they move the hostages in places where there is dense civilian population, under hospitals, under schools, because
into what's called the Gaza Metro, the tunnel network. It's apparently 500 kilometers under Gaza City, and they've tunneled.
And last year
made this huge elaborate network. And in fact, we have this report from our executive editor, National Security, Aditya Rajkol, who's been in one of these tunnels very recently. Let's take a look.
Well, at this moment, we are very close to the international border between Israel and Gaza. We've often heard, all across the international media, a lot of narrative, a lot of propaganda as well on what exactly happens here. But at this moment, we are at the bank inside a tunnel that was detected a few years back. And this was a tunnel that was used by a terrorist organization, Islamist jihadis, as well as Hamas, to in fact raise havoc on the innocent Israeli citizens. And this terror activity has been ongoing for years. These tunnels have been used often by, the Israeli, of course, the Palestinian and of course the Hamas terrorists to in fact attack not only the soldiers but also civilians who stay very close to this international border. These tunnels that we are standing here right behind me, you can see this tunnel. You can very well see how, this is a 2.5 kilometer long tunnel. 900 meters well within the Israeli territory that was used by the Islamist jihadis to in fact do smuggling, a lot of weapons also being brought in to in fact have these attacks. And right now we have a very important guest with us, Jonathan Conricus, Colonel Jonathan Conricus, who is the former international spokesperson of the IDF. I want to begin by asking you, before we go to the tunnels, that we've heard you often, I've seen your videos, in international media, and we've seen a lot of propaganda against Israel. We've seen a lot of narrative as if, there is Israeli occupation, Israel, if one were to believe the news reports, it's almost that every Palestinian house has an Israeli soldier standing outside and there are attacks happening every day. Please give us a clear picture, because we're standing back here. What's exactly happening here?
What's happening is that we have Israeli communities just hundreds of meters by us. And we're standing in a tunnel that was supposed to allow Hamas terrorists to get to those communities and kill Israeli civilians. We have a border about 900 meters away, which is monitored and patrolled by Israeli soldiers. And the purpose of that border is to keep the terrorists in Gaza and to keep Israeli civilians safe. Unfortunately, so many people around the world are fed with misinformation and come to wrong conclusions about the dynamics of the conflict here and perhaps get things mixed up. What I urge people is to believe or to visit themselves if they can, and if they cannot, to consume news from credible sources from the ground with less propaganda, as you said, and with more real information. It's a complex situation, but what I can assure you, as somebody who served in the IDF for 24 years, is that the IDF is, first of all, committed to the security of the State of Israel and Israeli civilians. But it is also committed to international law, and it tries in all of its operations to minimize the influence of its operations on Palestinian civilians, and it tries to distinguish between civilians and combatants, terrorists. What makes it very difficult is that the terrorists don't look like soldiers. They all try very hard to look like civilians. They hide from the using civilians as their human shields, and they use infrastructure like the one we have behind us in order to get to our civilians, to the Israeli civilians, and to attack them. So it's far more complex than is often portrayed in international media. It's an unfortunate situation in Gaza, But what I'm happy about is that today we can stand in a tunnel that was detected and neutralized by Israeli technology. It is no longer a threat to Israeli civilians. And thanks to the high-tech measures that Israel has, we have been able to overcome a significant strategic challenge, tunnel warfare against Israeli civilians. And I know that Israel is also happy to share this knowledge and experience with other militaries around the world who are facing similar threats by different terror organizations.
I'll take that forward, Jonathan, because you made a very important point towards the end that even India and Israel have been cooperating not just on technology, on tech, on drones, but also particularly defense partners. I want to ask you, because I hail from Kashmir, in Jammu and Kashmir, and we have a similar problem there, Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. But one thing that's been noted over the last few years is the tunnels and the drones that are being used.
Yes.
So tunnels are being used not just to smuggle in drugs, but also weapons now. Yeah. And there are active terrorists who are coming in and sneaking in through those tunnels to kill innocent Indians in Jammu and Kashmir. So is there a larger cooperation between India and Israel, perhaps also to study, not only get equipment and technology, but to study the patterns and, as you said, neutralize it?
I know that there's significant large-scale cooperation between Israel and India, weapons as well as knowledge and what we call in the military TTPs, tactics, techniques and procedures, which are very important. It took the IDF and the Israeli defense establishment about 20 years to figure out the technology and the ways in which to deal with tunnel warfare as effectively as we've done now. So it takes time, and I know that Israel is very happy to share that knowledge with select countries around the world. We are in close partnership with the Americans, but there are a few countries around the world which Israel trusts enough to be able to share that knowledge. And I think that it's definitely something that Israel, A, has an interest, and B, should be looking towards doing, not only systems, but sharing knowledge and the know-how of how to deal with that dimension of warfare, the underground warfare. The big challenge, I think the biggest difference is scope. India is a tremendously large country. Israel is very small, and by being small, the systems you need are confined to very select geographical areas. India faces immense challenges because the border is thousands of kilometers, and any terrorist coming from Pakistan has many different areas where he can opt to operate. That makes it even more challenging, and it forces Indian forces to be even more professional, more alert, and to have access to the best technological systems in the world in order to continue to defend. It's a tremendous challenge, and I think that India should use all of the experience from around the world that is available.
Well, let's hope that happens. So clearly we are standing right now inside a tunnel where we are reporting about the atrocities of the Hamas terrorists and the Islamist jihadis and the reality of the given situation. India and Israel are in fact marking the 30 years of their diplomatic ties, and India has emerged as one of the biggest defense partners of Israel, also studying the patterns of terrorism and using technology that's been offered by Israel.
So that was Aditya Raj Kaul in the Gaza metro. Aditya, tell us about your experience. What was it like being down there?
Well, it was quite an experience. I was with the Israeli Defense Forces, and they took us to all the borders. The two fronts that we are talking about really, one with Gaza and the other one in the northern Israel with Lebanon. This was just meters away from the border. Actually, from binoculars, I could actually spot Hamas checkpoints inside Gaza from there. And these were tunnels that were located over the years and in the last many months. I was with Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, who is the international spokesperson of the Israeli Defense Forces.
Who's making all the news and headlines
who's
right
actually
now.
on the global media speaking about what's happening and responding to the propaganda of Hamas as well. And I did a long interview with him where he explains how these tunnels were discovered, what really happens. And as you rightly pointed out, it's Gaza Metro, and these are tunnels all across the region, not only to transport people from Hamas, but also their rockets, their ammunition, and this is kind of a network which even Israel hasn't been able to uncover completely. They know about some tunnels, but not all of them. And that's why when the ground mobilization is happening right now, and the assault really happens in the next few days, the main challenging aspect, apart from room-to-room interventions and building-to-building interventions would also be unraveling this puzzle of tunnels where many Hamas terrorists would be located along with a lot of ammunition.
Right. And what did the IDF tell you when you were embedded with them? Did they say how they figured out a way of tracking these tunnels and breaking into them, or have they mapped it out fully, so to speak?
I think on the Israeli territory part, in southern Israel particularly, they have mapped almost all of them.
Right.
But in Gaza, it would be difficult. Another thing that I want to touch upon that we have also spoken in the past is a little bit of overconfidence that I saw in the IDF and in the political establishment of Israel. And that perhaps led to some kind of an intelligence failure, and IDF also losing its guard at the Gaza border. Because I felt, and when I spoke to the Israeli IDF senior leaders as well, who maintained that yes, we have a threat, the Hamas controls this territory completely, but never had they expected this kind of a barrage of terrorists coming in gliders and attacking from land, sea and air.
Launching a conventional assault, as you just mentioned.
So, Sandeep, I would also add what you're rightly pointing out, that has that armed forces become politicized?
Right.
Israelis, because of the nature of the agitation that have taken place in 8-9 months against the judiciary, and when they were calling people for ex-servicemen to come and join back against their agitation people, they refused to join.
Right.
So there is somewhere people say even the intelligence agencies were politicized between ultra right, which the government is, and so does that lead to some kind of loss of competence or something like that? This all has to be seen.
Right. So there are a lot of lessons for us to draw from that. While we don't face similar threats as Israel does, but there are larger lessons are the fact that you should avoid these.
One lesson I want to talk, and you talk to you, was proportionality.
Right.
When the Americans went after 9/11 to Afghanistan, there was no proportionality. They hammered whatever they wanted to hammer. They have hammered Iraq like that. Israelis have hammered now Gaza. We do tend to think about laws of the land, laws of warfare, and international humanitarian law and proportional response. I think we need to also study this disproportional response of this kind, and whether we as you recollect, we have a nuclear doctrine which says massive response. The word massive is disproportional response. So do we have to also learn other lessons? If they were firing 60,000 rounds of artillery shells in Ukraine on per day, that means there is disproportional response. We are not geared for this kind of thing.
You mean to how to respond to an outrage of this kind?
Yeah, and to be able to provide a disproportional response.
Right.
We may be geared to provide a proportional, rational response. But maybe sometimes you have to be prepared, at least it becomes a deterrent to the other side, that they have the capacity to give a disproportional response. And it is universalism, the world is doing it. Why don't we also start thinking and talking this?